This is Part 2 Episode 4. Song Duan and the two others did not plan to remain for long after obtaining the item. This space seemed to be emitting an exclusion strength that pushed them out of it. Bastard. Lin Dong's expression was gloomy. Immediately, he wanted to give chase and head out to settle the scores. However, little Martin swayed and drifted out. He lazily said, "What are you so anxious about? What have you discovered?" Lin Dong gritted his teeth in the face of this manner of little Martin. However, he immediately calmed down. Although little Martin loved to joke at times, Lit would clearly not do something vexatious at such a time. Since this was not the case, it was likely that this cunning old fellow had discovered something again. How uninteresting. Little Martin, who originally wanted to see Lin Dong jumping on his feet, was startled when it saw this. Clearly, it had not expected Lin Dong to react to the situation so quickly. Immediately, he curled his mouth and spoke. "If you really go and snatch those three things, it is likely that you will allow the inheritance of the 8th-level sect to pass by you." Little Martin looked at the stone block. At this moment, the palm imprint, fist imprint and the finger hole had disappeared. However, little Martin's eyes were increasingly focused. "Extend your hand." Lin Dong hesitated for a moment after hearing little Martin's faint voice. He extended his hand and gently touched the stone block. Boom. Lin Dong's expression instantly changed when he made contact with the stone block. A little paleness vaguely appeared on his face. At this moment, he could sense a wave of extremely fierce and majestic fist aura sweeping out from within the interior of the stone block in all directions. That fist aura was the same as the one which was present in the body of the old man in the picture earlier. The fist aura was shapeless and colorless. However, one was able to sense its actual existence. It was as vast and mighty as an ocean, and Lin Dong was just like a small boat that could be overturned anytime within it. Lin Dong appeared extremely tiny in the face of the fist aura. Even Lin Dong's legs felt weak in the face of the majestic steel-like pressure. Crack! The stone block suddenly cracked, forming numerous crack lines. After which, they expanded and the stone block finally completely cracked apart. Following the bursting apart of the stone block, an invisible cluster that seemed to be like the fiercest and most powerful thing in this world in Lin Dong's eyes, slowly surfaced from within the stone block. After which, it was suspended in front of Lin Dong. This is fist aura. Lin Dong's eyes shrunk as he stared at the strange thing in front of it. He could sense the frightening strength contained within it. 8th-level fist aura. This is the real 8th-level true ideal. Those earlier are merely low-quality objections. If you take them, you would instead be directly expelled from this place, and you can forget about obtaining the 8th-level fist aura. Little Martin spoke faintly. Lin Dong inhaled a breath of cold air. From the picture earlier, he was aware that this 8th-level fist aura should be left behind by that extremely frightening old man. Lin Dong was unaware of just what level that old man had reached. He was actually able to form such a fist aura. This invisible ethereal thing was not something that someone of Lin Dong level could come into contact with. Lin Dong involuntarily felt an impulse to form some cold perspiration when he thought of how precious the 8th-level fist aura was. It was fortunate that he did not obtain that light cluster earlier. Otherwise, he would really lose something precious and obtain something that was far less valuable. No wonder that old man mentioned someone with an affinity. It seemed that those words were true. Those 3 clusters of light earlier were clearly just something to trick people. Lin Dong parted his mouth and quietly calmed his heart. Only then did he extend his hand and grabbed at the 8th-level fist aura. The latter did not pose any resistance. It directly and successfully entered Lin Dong's body. After which, Lin Dong could also sense the 8th-level fist aura entering his dantian, and quietly suspending within it. It was completely without any fierce overbearingness. However, Lin Dong could sense that as long as he activated it quietly, this 8th-level fist aura would unleash an extremely powerful and lethal blow. This thing was just like an enhancement item. In the future, as long as Lin Dong mixed any attack that he used in the future with a little of it, the might of the attack would suddenly soar. This was the true inheritance of the 8th-level sect. Child, you still have more to learn. Once you possess Grandpa Martin's eyesight, you will be able to roam this world as you wish. Little Martin laughed. Its laughter contained a pride that could not be hidden. Lin Dong involuntarily parted his mouth and smiled when he heard this. However, he must admit that Little Martin's eyesight was sharp. If it was not because Little Martin had opened his mouth earlier, it was likely that Lin Dong would have been expelled from this place, and would not be able to obtain this 8th-level fist aura. Let's go. It's time to leave. There are still some scores that must be settled. It is not so easy to take advantage of me. Lin Dong smiled while his eyes gradually sunk a little. Although he might not have obtained this 8th-level fist aura, if it was not because of the interruption of those fellows, the feeling of having been robbed by others was truly displeasing. Since Lin Dong felt displeased in his heart, he naturally needed to settle the source of his displeasure. A cold glint flickered in Lin Dong's eyes. His body moved and gradually faded. Finally, he completely disappeared from this place. The interior of the main hall was in chaos. Everyone were examining the stone block. The hands of Lin Dong, Song Duan and the 2 others were pressed tightly onto it. A powerful ripple was being vaguely emitted from the interior of the stone block. Little Flame stood beside Lin Dong. He frowned while looking at Song Duan and the 2 others, holding back his impulse to send 3 hateful fellows flying with his metal rod. Before receiving Lin Dong's orders, he would definitely suppress the various emotions within his heart. Whump! A slight sound was suddenly emitted from the stone block, while Little Flame was looking at Lin Dong. After which, he saw that the bodies of Song Duan and the 2 others shook before staggering backwards. However, their faces did not reveal any fury. Instead, they were filled with a wild joy. The expressions of some people within the main hall changed slightly when they saw the expressions of the 3 of them. Could it be that Song Duan and the 2 others had obtained something from the stone block? Song Duan and the 2 others were unconcerned about the gazes of those around. Their eyes swept over Lin Dong's back. After which, a flicker flashed through them. They waved their hands. Let's go. It appeared that they were aware that their action earlier would definitely anger Lin Dong. Although they were not afraid, they did not wish to fight head-on against someone with a crazy temperament. Moreover, they had already obtained the inheritance. Once they successfully mastered it in the future, it was likely that Lin Dong could no longer be so arrogant in front of them. Hearing the voices of Song Duan and the 2 others, those subordinates of theirs hurriedly nodded. After which, they pulled back. Aren't the 3 of you a little too irresponsible if you leave now? However, just when the 3 of them were preparing to leave, Lin Dong, who had their backs facing them, finally let out a faint smile. His hand that was adhered to the stone block fell, before he turned around and stared at Song Duan's group with a mocking expression. Song Duan and the 2 others narrowed their eyes when they saw that Lin Dong still managed to give chase. They asked, "What do you want?" If it is not because I had blocked the fist aura on the stone block, it is likely that the 3 of you would not have been able to enter. It is right that anyone who sees it should have a share. However, the 3 of you had even snatched my share. Isn't it a little too overboard? Lin Dong smiled. His eyes revealed a thread of chillness as he looked towards Mo Shao and slowly said, "Lin Dong, this kind of inheritance is something that anyone with ability should obtain. The fact that you have failed to snatch it means that you do not possess the ability. What are you planning to do by saying such nonsense here? Do you want us to hand over the inheritance that we have obtained? Mosho could not help but let out a cold mocking laughter. Moreover, the three of us did not make a fuss over you having snatched most of the demon dragon dog's essence blood outside. However, don't think that you really have the qualification to stand on the ground as us. We are not like Shikuan, who had just entered the 2 yuan nirvana stage. A glint flashed through the eyes of Song Duan and Peng Fei. However, they did not say anything. These two people were clearly extremely intelligent. Even at this time, they did not speak to Lin Dong with harsh words. Clearly, they were still a little fearful of Lin Dong. At this moment, everyone in the main hall had understood the story from the beginning to the end. It seemed that Lin Dong had entered the stone block first and found some treasure within it. However, before he could obtain them, Song Duan and the two others, who had followed him in, had interfered. Moreover, the subsequent events could also be easily foretold. After having been taken advantage of, Lin Dong would naturally not let the matter rest. Yet, attempting to get Mo Sho's group to hand over something that they had got their hands on was clearly an impossible thing. Looking at this situation, a face-off would likely be unavoidable regardless of how one tried to avoid it. The eyes of quite a number of people flickered when they thought of this. Naturally, the greater the chaos in this situation, the better it would be for them. They might even be able to randomly fish something during the chaos and obtain some surprise. What you have said is true. The inheritance here is indeed something that those with ability should obtain. However, with your ability, it is likely that you have yet to reach this level. Lin Dong smiled. The words that he spoke caused the expression of quite a number of people to change slightly. Oh? Ha ha, Lin Dong, looks like beating Shikuan has really boosted your confidence. Although you have already heard these words several times, I shall still repeat it to you again. A person should be aware of his limits. At times, it is not a bad thing to suffer some losses. Mo Sho's tone was dense. Looking at his expression, everyone were aware that this expert from the Sand Empire had already held a killing intent towards Lin Dong. Hand over the inheritance that you have obtained. However, Lin Dong merely raised his eyes in the face of Mo Sho's dense words. He ceased saying anything and extended his hand. Rat, you are seeking death. The few experts behind Mo Sho immediately became furious when they saw this situation. Mo Sho's eyes stared intently at Lin Dong. A moment later, his throat emitted a strange creaking sound as he slowly said, Brat, I'm afraid that you don't have the qualification to say these words to me. It's just as well. I also wish to see just how outstanding this fellow, who has a mighty reputation recently, really is. Hopefully, you are not just a useless person who only knows how to speak. Mo Sho's eyes had completely turned dark and chilly after his cry sounded. He took a stride forward and majestic powerful yuan power surged out from within his body like a volcano that had erupted. A fierce and mighty pressure swept across the main hall. Other than Song Duan and a few others, the remaining people hurriedly stepped backwards, while maneuvering their yuan power to block that yuan power pressure. Swoosh! Mo Sho's figure directly turned into a black figure and rushed forward. Surging yuan power gathered and immediately carried a shocking pressure, as it ruthlessly swept towards Lin Dong. Blood surged in Little Flame's eyes, when he saw that Mo Sho was finally unable to control himself any longer and attacked Lin Dong. However, just as he was about to attack, Lin Dong merely waved his hand and stopped Little Flame. A thought passed through his mind and surging yuan power, as well as mental energy agglomerated in front of him, forming a defensive barrier. Boom! Mo Sho's attack violently landed onto the barrier that was formed from mental energy and yuan power. Immediately, a low muffled sound was emitted. Although the powerful force had shook the barrier until ripples were formed, it failed to shatter it. By relying on the yuan power of a 1 yuan nirvana stage, and the ability of a 1 seal heaven symbol master, the current Lin Dong would not be at a disadvantage even when facing a 2 yuan nirvana stage expert head-on. No wonder you are so arrogant. You actually do have some ability. However, you won't be so fortunate after this. Mo Sha let out a cold laughter after his attack was blocked. His body moved and mud yellow color yuan power whizzed out. It vaguely transformed into yellow sand that spread over the sky, possessing an extremely spectacular aura. Clearly, he did not intend to delay this fight any longer. Yellow sand bone eroding palm. A cold cry suddenly sounded from within the yellow sand. One could see the yellow sand permeating the sky gathered in a lightning-like fashion. After which, it directly transformed into an enormous yellow sand fist. An eroding vapor was present within the wind from the fist as it struck towards Lin Dong's barrier from all directions. The people around him were evidently quite surprised when they saw Mo Sha's actions. They were naturally aware that this yellow sand bone eroding palm was basically one of Mo Sha's killing move. It was unexpected that he had used it so soon. It seemed that this Lin Dong's was indeed quite skilled. Song Duan and Peng Fei narrowed their eyes when they saw this scene. Their strength was similar to Mo Sha. This attack from the latter was something that even they did not dare to slight. Lin Dong raised his eyes. His pupils watched the enormous palm, with surging yellow sand that was flying over. He could also sense the sharpness and faint killing intent that was contained within Mo Sha's attack. Huff! A cluster of white vapor was spat out from Lin Dong's mouth. Immediately, he threw a fist forward in front of all the eyes present within the main hall. This was a simple fist, without any signs of martial arts being used. There was also the absence of any shocking strength surging within it. This fist appeared completely ordinary, without any area that caused one to be surprised. However, none of them knew that when Lin Dong executed this punch, the 8-level fist aura within his dantian wiggled slightly. Immediately, a fist aura was separated under the command of his mind. Bang! When this fist aura surged, a finishing touch seemed to have been placed on that ordinary punch from Lin Dong. In an instant, it underwent a complete transformation. An invisible fierce powerful ripple swept over the place at a frightening speed. The expressions of Song Duan and Peng Fei immediately underwent an intense transformation. At this moment, they could vaguely sense that Lin Dong's body seemed to be showing signs that it had synchronized with the ancient stone block. They were unaware of just what this scene represented. However, they could sense that Lin Dong originally ordinary punch currently possessed an extremely frightening explosive force. Bang! The fist wind that contained the 8-level fist aura collided with that yellow sand palm without giving way. Break! An incomparably fierce tone was suddenly spat out from Lin Dong's mouth. At the next instant, everyone's eyes widened. They could see that Mo Sha's full-powered palm had actually collapsed at this moment. Swoosh! The expression of Mo Sha, who was at the back, suddenly turned pale white at this moment. A dense shock surged within his eyes as he looked at Lin Dong. The interior of the main hall was completely silent. Everyone's eyes contained a shocked expression that could not be concealed. They were truly unable to believe that the palm, which contained nearly the full strength of Mo Sha, would actually be forcefully shattered by Lin Dong's simple and ordinary punch. What a frightening fist aura! Of course, those experts like Song Duan possessed an extreme solemnness within their eyes. They were naturally able to sense the shocking fist aura that was being emitted from this single punch of Lin Dong. The intensity was as if it intended to shatter this entire place. They were really unable to imagine just how was it possible for Lin Dong to possess such a frightening fist aura. All of them clearly understood that an extremely rare, yet powerful thing like a fist aura, was not something that someone at their level could come into contact with. Only those true experts could brew such a frightening conception. At that level, it was likely that most martial arts were already useless towards them. By possessing that kind of aura, a simple raising of their limbs would be powerful enough to shatter the lands and the sky. How is that possible? Song Duan and Peng Fei looked at each other. They were able to see some disbelief within the other party's eyes. However, both of them were also extremely intelligent. After the initial shock, an expression of deep thought flashed across their eyes. A moment later, their bodies shook, seemingly having understood something. The true inheritance of this 8-level sect is not the martial arts, but the 8-level fist aura. Song Duan and Peng Fei's expression turned bitter at that instant. A regret surged up their hearts. Although the martial arts that they had obtained was quite good, it was undoubtedly an entire level weaker when compared to this 8-level fist aura. The hearts of two of them, which were still extremely happy at having obtained an inheritance earlier, was drenched with a basin of cold water. Their entire body turned icy cold as a result. Mo Xiao's expression was a little pale, as he hurriedly took a couple of steps back in front of numerous stunned eyes. His gaze carried a little shock as he spoke in a hoarse voice. This is the 8-level fist aura. You have actually obtained the 8-level fist aura. Mo Xiao involuntarily roared the last few words. There was a dense greed and dissatisfaction that surged within his eyes. Originally, he had been gloating because he thought that Lin Dong had gained nothing. However, this scene had caused him to understand that the one had the final laugh in this 8-level sect remains was still Lin Dong. Thanks to you. Lin Dong smiled slightly. There was nothing fake in his smile. This caused Mo Xiao to involuntarily spit a mouthful of blood when he heard this. Although he did not understand what Lin Dong meant, it seemed that the reason Lin Dong was able to obtain the 8-level fist aura was possibly due to him. Could it be? Mo Xiao's thoughts was quite acute. His mind spun and he seemed to have understood something. His eyes suddenly shrunk. Those 3 light clusters are merely lures. The true 8-level fist aura still remained on the stone block. You are correct. Too bad there is no prize. Lin Dong parted his mouth and smiled. His eyes suddenly turned cold as he strided forward and ruthlessly threw another punch. The 8-level fist aura also surged out from his dantian once again. The aura around Lin Dong had also become as fierce and violent as the lightning that lingered in the clouds. Bang! The space in the large hall shook violently for a moment. That wind from the punch that contained a thunder-like fierceness swept towards Mo Xiao in a lightning-like manner, appearing like a storm. Bastard, why are you attacking us since you have obtained the 8-level fist aura? Don't tell me that we are not even allowed to drink some soup even though you are feasting on some meat. Who do you think you are? Mo Xiao roared angrily. The yuan power within his body seemed to have been suppressed, as he sensed that shocking fist aura pressure. I do not mind letting you guys have soup. However, I do not like to be schemed by others, nor do I like your attitude. Lin Dong's eyes were icy cold. His arm shook and the majestic fist wind charged at Mo Xiao, who had maneuvered his yuan power to surround himself with lightning-like speed. Boom! The fist wind smashed onto the fully armed Mo Xiao's body. A low muffled sound spread, and a shocking energy ripple swept over from the mid-air. After which, everyone saw that the layers of defense over Mo Xiao's body actually crumbed directly. Grug! A mouthful of fresh blood was spat out as Mo Xiao's body miserably shot backwards. Finally, he violently slammed onto a wall. That hard wall swiftly formed a couple of crack lines. Every single expert from the Sand Empire changed their expressions due to shock when they saw this scene. They had heard rumors that Lin Dong had defeated Shakuan. However, they had only heard of it. Moreover, Mo Shaw's strength was stronger than Shakuan. Yet, after only a couple of exchanges, Mo Shaw was actually miserably defeated by Lin Dong. Swoosh! Lin Dong's body rushed out. With a flash, he appeared in front of Mo Shaw. He curled his hand and grabbed at the latter's head. A devouring strength erupted. After which, everyone saw a light cluster being directly ripped from Mo Shaw's head. Little flame. Lin Dong let out a low cry after ripping out this light cluster. His arm tossed and the light cluster was thrown towards Little Flame. The latter was startled momentarily before grabbing it and placing it into his body. The inheritance that Mo Shaw had obtained was actually being snatched. This caused Mo Shaw's eyes to turn blood red. He immediately turned his head and Song Duan's group before speaking in a dense voice. Do the both of you really think this fellow will let up if you stand idly by the side now? Mo Shaw clearly understood that his strength alone was no match for Lin Dong, who had obtained the 8th-level fist aura. If he wanted to fight with Lin Dong, he must join hands with Song Duan and Peng Fei. The expression in the eyes of Song Duan and Peng Fei changed a little when they heard Mo Shaw's words. They clenched their fists slightly. A moment later, they suddenly relaxed it. After which, they raised their heads, smiled towards Lin Dong and said, "If Brother Lin Dong really wants it, we will hand over the martial arts inheritance." The atmosphere within the large hall became a little quiet. Everyone, even Lin Dong, were a little stunned as they looked at Song Duan and Peng Fei. Clearly, they did not expect that these two Yuan Nirvana stage experts would actually choose to surrender. You too. Mo Shaw was also stunned when he saw this scene. His throat involuntarily fell to sweetness again. He did not expect Song Duan and Peng Fei were actually this cunning. Lin Dong stared at Song Duan and Peng Fei. He immediately laughed softly. It was likely that he understood the intention of these two. Song Duan and Peng Fei were extremely unwilling to hand over the inheritance martial arts. However, they were also aware of how trouble it would be to deal with Lin Dong, who had obtained the 8th-level fist aura. Therefore, they directly lowered their stance and surrender in front of so many people. The both of them had given Lin Dong a great amount of face. This cunningness was indeed quite great. Most importantly, this character of being able to bend depending on the situation caused Lin Dong to be a little surprised. Anyone with affinity can obtain this inheritance treasure. Since the both of you have this affinity, it is only natural that I do not have the qualification to say any more nonsense. Lin Dong nodded slightly and laughed. He did not act too ruthlessly. Lin Dong's words were similar to those with ability should possess it that Mo Shaw had said earlier. The meaning within it, however, was completely different. This caused Mo Shaw's expression to be incomparable green with fury. This fellow was just using him to set an example. On the other hand, a joy flashed past the face of Song Duan and Peng Fei. They cupped their hands together towards Lin Dong. It seemed that this soft stance did indeed possess some benefit. At the very least, it was many times better than Mo Shaw, who had lost both his face and treasure. Lin Dong, you should not be too pleased. My Sand Empire will definitely not let this matter rest. Green and white mixed on Mo Shaw's face, causing him to appear extremely miserable. He looked at the mocking gaze from around him, before finally rubbing off the trace of blood on the corner of his mouth. After tossing some vicious words, he led his people and left with great dissatisfaction. Lin Dong glanced at Mo Shaw's back. He did not stop him. Lin Dong might be able to defeat the 2 Yuan Nirvana stage expert Mo Shaw, but if the latter really wanted to flee, even Lin Dong would have to use some of his trump cards as payment if he wanted to kill him. At this moment, however, Lin Dong was unwilling to use these trump cards on Mo Shaw. Numerous eyes watched this scene from within the main hall. All of them involuntarily, but quietly clicked their tongue. Some gazes repeatedly swept over Lin Dong. They were really unable to imagine that Lin Dong was actually able to use his strength alone to force three great high-rank empire to surrender and admit defeat. Let's go. It is likely that the four mysterious halls are about to be opened. Those are the main course. Lin Dong was unconcerned about the surrounding eyes. He turned his head and whispered to Little Flame with a smile. After which, he ceased remaining in this place. His body moved and he turned around to leave in front of the complicated gazes of Song Duan and the others. Lin Dong and Little Flame did not pause after exiting the large stone hall. Instead, they directly headed toward the deepest part of the treasure trove. Lin Dong had a pretty good haul in this trip to the 8th-level sect remains. Although Lin Dong did not obtain any martial arts inheritance, the 8th-level fist aura could be considered as a true treasure. Ordinarily speaking, this 8th-level fist aura could be considered as a special conception. Such a conception was something that could only be brewed by an expert, whose strength had reached an extremely powerful level. At the very least, with Lin Dong's current strength, it was impossible for him to reach this level. Perhaps, he might be able to possess this kind of conception in the future, but right now, he still needed time to grow before he could do so. By obtaining some understanding of the fist aura conception at this moment, it was likely that this would be extremely beneficial to Lin Dong in the future. Just the remains of this 8th-level sect is already this rich. I wonder just who had obtained the inheritance of the Ground Martial sect that is ranked the top amongst the protector sects. Lin Dong softly muttered as he passed through the mid-air. Those who could arrive at this deep regions of the secret treasure trove were definitely not weak. Moreover, it was impossible for Lin Dong to be the only one who had met with a lucky opportunity. Others might even be more blessed than he was. Little Flame, what is the inheritance that you have obtained earlier? Lin Dong suddenly turned his head, looked at Little Flame behind and smilingly asked. It is a martial arts. 8th-level Sky Seal. It should be a low-grade soul martial arts. Little Flame rubbed his head and laughed in a silly manner. He really did love this martial arts. The 8th-level sect specialized in being tough and forceful. Since Little Flame actual form was a demonic beast, this kind of forceful and strong martial arts was most suitable for him. A low-grade soul martial arts Lin Dong softly praised. It was indeed worthy of being an ancient sect. Even something that was randomly obtained from it was a soul martial arts. If this thing was taken outside, it was likely that even those high-rank empire would fight over it until blood flowed. Even if it is at the low-grade level, something like the soul martial arts was far from what a high-grade manifestation martial art could compare with. If this 8th-level sect's martial arts is mixed with the 8th-level fist aura, its might would definitely soar by many times. Since you already possess the martial arts, you should not be lacking this fist aura. Lin Dong mused for a moment. Suddenly, he patted his hand on Little Flame's body, and an 8th-level fist aura was poured into the latter's body. This 8th-level fist aura might be of quite a great use to you. Try to understand it. It will be of critical importance to your future training. Although the 8th-level fist aura that Lin Dong had obtained was powerful, it was not something that was originally his. Hence, this fist aura would diminish each time he used it and could be considered quite precious. However, in order to allow Little Flame to gain the opportunity to understand such a fist aura, Lin Dong would naturally not act stingily. If Little Flame could become more powerful, it would also be extremely helpful for him. Even though Lin Dong had already successfully reached the deep regions of the secret treasure trove, the competitors, which he would subsequently meet, would likely be even more troublesome to deal with. All of them were the top-tier experts from the northwestern region, or even the other regions. They were all renowned and great existences in the entire ancient battlefield. It would not be an easy task for Lin Dong to compete with them for the inheritance of the last four mysterious sect as well as the samsara pill, which he had no idea of its location. Little Flame sensed the 8-level fist aura that had entered his body and felt the forceful and strong feeling contained within it. A joyful expression also flashed across his eyes. This fierceness was indeed worthy of the name 8-level. Bang! An intense low sound suddenly appeared in the space far in front of them not long after Lin Dong had poured a 8-level fist aura into Little Flame's body. This sudden commotion immediately caught the attention of everyone who had broke into the ancient treasure trove. Immediately, the sound of parting wind rang in the sky. Numerous figures were suspended in it as their eyes stared at the deep regions of this realm with astonishment. That Lin Dong's eyes were focused intently at the deep regions. A moment later, his eyes shrunk. He saw that an incomparable large and grand island seemed to be vaguely surfacing from the fluctuating space in the deep regions. One could even blurry see some ancient majestic clusters of building on the island. Its vast and might aura could still cause one to feel shock even though it was this far away. For great mysterious sect remains. A shaken expression flashed across Lin Dong's eyes. Immediately, his face revealed a sudden wild joy. This most precious secret treasure, that was hidden in the deepest region, was finally about to reveal itself. It looks like all the remains of the 5 great protector sects had been opened by someone. Lin Dong's eyes flickered. His heart involuntarily sighed. This ancient battlefield was really filled with hidden experts. All the remains of the 5 great protector sects were actually obtained by others within such a short period of time. Let's go, Little Flame. What is going to happen next is the most important. Whether Little Martin can obtain a physical body again will all depend on this. Lin Dong's eyes were fiery hot. His body rushed forward. He had experienced various danger along the way, and had finally reached the deepest part. After this, he would likely really have to end up fighting head-on for whatever he wanted to obtain. Little Flame also nodded heavily. His large hand tightly grabbed onto a metal rod. He was similarly aware that they would subsequently face the fiercest and most dangerous fights, since they had entered the ancient battlefield. Swoosh swoosh. The appearance of the 4 great mysterious sects remains undoubtedly caused the atmosphere of the secret treasure trove to turn heated. Everyone who had managed to get into this place all began to move regardless of how strong the resistance was. Immediately the sound of rushing wind continuously appeared in the sky. Numerous figures rushed over from all directions as they wildly shot towards the deep regions of this realm. A treasure like a low-grade soul martial arts had appeared within the remains of the 8-level sect. Moreover, there was even the 8-level fist aura, something that was impossible for a Nirvana stage expert to control. Being the leader of this Tiangang alliance, just what scary would the inheritance of the 4 great mysterious sects be? This question would likely cause one's blood to boil just by imagining the answer. As long as one was lucky enough to obtain the inheritance of any one of these 4 great mysterious sects, it was likely that one could soar to the sky and stand out in this ancient battlefield to be an existence that could tower over countless number of empires. Such an allure caused even someone with Lin Dong's character to be helplessly attracted. Which ordinary person would not go crazy over it? While many human figures flashed across the sky, a few of them slowly walked out from some remains that were hidden in the deep mountains located towards the north of this deep regions of the secret treasure trove. Ha ha, is the 4 great mysterious sects remains about to be open? It looks like the remaining 4 protector sects remains had been obtained by others. The leader of the few human figures was not an unfamiliar one. It was Liu Bai, whom Lin Dong had met sometime earlier. From his appearance, he had clearly obtained the remains of a protector sect. Those fellows are really lucky. We have spent quite a great amount of effort in order to find this rank 3 Great Tooth sect remains. I wonder just which lucky individuals had obtained the rank 2 8-level sect and the rank 1 ground martial sect. A human figure behind Liu Bai laughed faintly. Although the remains of the 5 great protector sects are quite strong, they are merely the appetizer. There is no need to be too envious. The true main course is only beginning now. Let's go. We cannot delay any longer. Liu Bai laughed. After which, his figure rushed out. He took the lead to rush towards the remains of the 4 great mysterious sects. Demon Spear Liu Bai, a black-robed figure on the top of a mountain, looked at the figure that had flashed across the sky in the distance. His pale white long hand was extended out from his sleeves as he raised his head slightly, revealed a somewhat pale face. Surprisingly, he was that mysterious fellow who called himself Yang Sen that Lin Dong had met not long after entering this ancient treasure trove. All 4 great overlords of the northwestern region has actually appeared. This is getting interesting. Yang Sen glanced at the western sky and smiled faintly. After which, his body moved and strangely disappeared from this mountain top. Bang! An ancient and heavy main door of a remains was blasted apart. A human figure shot out in a miserable manner. Fresh blood formed a glaring mark under him. He looked at the figure that was slowly walking out of the main door with fear. Before he could speak, a stone cut through the air and penetrated through his neck. The walls of the remains contained some blurry traces that vaguely seemed to form an incomparably sharp Wu character. What a good place! That tall figure stretched his lazy waist and smiled faintly. He immediately raised his head and looked into the deep regions of this realm. There was an extremely sinister and cold expression surging within his eyes. Lin Dong has also entered this place, right? I'm really curious just what level he had reached. Like I said, I will let everyone in the Lin clan know that only I am the most outstanding genius in the history of the clan. That Lin Dong is merely just an epiphyllum that bloomed temporarily. Sunlight scattered down from the sky and shone onto that handsome yet sinisterly cold face. That incomparable familiar appearance was surprisingly Lin Langtian, who had separated with Lin Dong for a long time. This video will end here.